Welcome back to another episode of TezTalks Radio. Earlier in the month, we had Arthur Breitman on and discussed quite a bit of stuff, ranging from Tezos domains, Futarchy, and more. If you didn't get to check that out and listen to it, be sure to tune in, and we'll link that down below. But
yeah, there was also some excellent memes in there.
Yes, there was some excellent memes too. Yeah. But moving on, today we'll be getting into an ecosystem update and providing some analysis and thoughts on all the exciting developments we've witnessed within the Tezos ecosystem. As usual, myself, William McKenzie, and Brian Lee of Tezos Commons will sit down and go through it all. Brian, how's everything going? Did you get to celebrate Thanksgiving or anything?
Well, we celebrated Japanese Thanksgiving on Monday. So there's this holiday called Labor Day Thanksgiving. I've only been here for maybe 2 years now. So I kind of thought it was on the same scale as American Thanksgiving. So I was telling people here like, Happy Thanksgiving. But apparently people don't do that here. And it was kind of embarrassing for me. So it's just like a normal day off for people. It's not really like, oh, you sit down and have a big turkey. So we'll be actually doing American Thanksgiving this weekend. So I'm looking forward to eating some food and just chilling. How about you?
On my end, we had, the usual traditional Thanksgiving dinner, the turkey dressing, all that, some wine, and listen to a bit of music. Nothing really too exciting, but
that sounds great. It doesn't have to be too exciting. I'm sure it was nice to kind of get away from all of the blockchain stuff for a day.
But here we are later at night, my time.
Oh, it's still Thanksgiving there, right?
Yeah, it's about 7:30 right now when we're recording this. So
I'm surprised you don't have food coma.
A little bit earlier, but it's kind of weaned off. I think we ate around 12 or 1 o'clock.
That's like way earlier than when I usually do Thanksgiving. We usually start maybe around 3 or 4 p.m. So by 7 or 8, I
don't know if you noticed this, but I think everyone has noticed this. There's been quite a bit of volatility here lately in this space, but it was interesting to see some news pop up, I believe last week, surrounding some crypto regulation that was going to be imposed here soon. Did you see that anywhere, Brian?
Yeah, I think there was a tweet from, I'm sure several people have been talking about it, but where I saw it was a tweet from Brian Armstrong from Coinbase, and he had a pretty significant Twitter thread. So we will for sure link that in the show notes, but it was just talking about how there's some rumor. It's apparently a rumor that there's going to be some impending crypto regulation that will enforce, I guess this would mostly apply to US-based exchanges, where they have to verify the identity of a self-custodial wallet. So if you have like a ledger, or if you're using some kind of paper wallet, if you want to send from Coinbase to your own wallet, they have to do some kind of identity verification to link that custodial wallet address that you control to your identity. And it's like, at the same time, like, I know why the government might want to do this. They want to keep track of how much property you have and make sure you're paying your taxes, I guess. But at the same time, I think it's a big blow to both the philosophy and the potential of crypto. And it's kind of up for debate whether the US's kind of position as the number one country, not in all aspects, but like when you think of like what's the top country, people usually will say America. They're the leader in many things. It's like, is their position as the number one world power making this kind of decision, will that be enough to significantly affect crypto, or is crypto as an industry distributed and decentralized enough by now where maybe it won't affect it that much? It's, it's kind of hard to say, but we did see that initial response on the market where kind of coinciding with that news/rumor, we saw like a sudden downtrend. So that was kind of interesting. Did you have any thoughts on that, Will?
Not a whole lot. I would say it's definitely going to have some unintended side effects for sure, but kind of reminds me, more so the timing. There was this big thing going on with Coinbase a little while ago with them hiring an employee who had ties to this, I guess, data collection company.
Yeah, I briefly remember something about that. Don't recall the specific details.
So I guess we can go ahead and get into the news. For the first thing we'd like to talk about, I'm sure many of you all have seen the announcements of the DirectAuth within the Kukai Wallet. And we actually had the lead developer class on last month for TezTalks Live, and he kind of dove into the features a bit. So if you'd like to check that out, we'll be sure to link that in the bottom as well. But just over the past few weeks, my Twitter feed has been bombarded with people using this, and it's really getting a lot of positive feedback. For those not too familiar with the release, essentially users are able through DirectAuth to send Tez to Google, Reddit, and Twitter accounts. The cool thing about this is that these accounts don't actually need to do anything to receive it. It's kind of something, once it's been sent, they'll have the ability to claim it. But on a macro sense, I guess this does open up some privacy concerns, because you're essentially tying an address to your social handle, right? But we've seen it gaining quite a bit of traction as of late. In fact, it was actually used to reward some of the nominees and winners of the Tezos Community Rewards Program, which was recently launched. There's nominations up for November, and that will be a pool of about 5,000 XTZ. So we'll link this below, but be sure to vote on who you think is deserving of winning that nomination. Outside of that, Brian, did you have any thoughts on the DirectAuth release?
Yeah, I think I have a lot of thoughts on this, actually. Seems to be a theme of this podcast where I have too many thoughts about everything. But this is why we're here, right? So I think these kinds of things are always needed, especially when you're dealing with something as abstract as crypto, where identities are essentially represented by long strings of random numbers and letters, right? It's a really long string, and if you wanted to send something to your friend, if you wanted to send some Tez to your friend, what would be the process of doing that? Well, your friend would have to send you this long address first, and then you would have to copy and paste it into a wallet app, and there's just more steps than what I think would be necessary. So these DirectAuth things, and we kind of touched on this with Arthur Breitman in the last episode where we were talking about mapping domain names to wallet addresses. And this is kind of the same thing. You're mapping someone's Google identity, their Reddit identity, Twitter, to a Tezos address. And what that allows is it allows for more frictionless sending of Tez, because you no longer have to ask someone for their address. You don't have to copy and paste. You can just say like, oh, if I know Brian's Twitter account is BWHLI, I can just send that to him. And if he has that map to a Tezos address, then then he'll be sure to receive that. And yeah, I think you're right in that there may be some privacy concerns since Tezos is a public blockchain. You know, if someone sent me, I don't know, 1,000 Tez, and then they could see that my address is linked to my Twitter handle, then they can know that, oh, Brian has all of this Tez. And maybe that's a concern, but at the same time, I think there's something to be said about making different addresses for different purposes.
Right.
And if you're in crypto at this stage in the game, you're probably smart enough. Well, I shouldn't say that. I shouldn't say smart enough ever, but you should probably be smart enough to say like, oh, maybe the address that I hold all of my like cold wallet storage, etc., you know, where most people keep the bulk of their holdings off exchange on a ledger somewhere, maybe that's not the address that I want to be mapping to these kinds of things. So if you have more like a throwaway address or something else, or I think you can actually make an address within the wallet, then use that for like your daily spending kind of thing. You know, just the same like in your wallet that you carry around. It's probably much less money than what's in your bank account, right? And so that's kind of the same idea here. For things like these that are tied to your public handles, use that more as a daily spending address, where if you want to send some money to someone, or if you want to receive some rewards from the community rewards program, you know, that's the address maybe that you can provide. So that's kind of what I had on my mind.
Yeah, and just going back on what you said about actually sending to other people and them knowing your balance, I think there's actually a functionality with that service. You know, whenever someone sends X amount to, you know, whether it be Google, Twitter, Reddit account, there's actually a message that pops up, you know, like a warning that says, are you sure, you know, you want to send this amount? I think the amount is about 200 XTZ. Yeah. So, but I'd like to circle back and touch on the Tezos Community Rewards Program. I find this program to be a really great initiative, and I think it's going to help foster community building and engagement. And it's already doing that in kind of a fun and neat way. You know, in fact, we're already seeing some winners begin contributing more value to the ecosystem. You know, one winner, to give an example, I believe his name was Vince. He's now building a Tezos-centered news publication. And I believe he was a winner for Best Article of October. You know, as this program begins to progress and some of the initial kinks get ironed out, I think we'll definitely see a lot of positive effects within the ecosystem as a result.
This is also something that's been on my mind a lot lately. As you know, I've been working on a blog post about the importance of community building in crypto. And I think when it comes to this, we really have to think about where we want to be 5 or 10 years down the line. Because one thing that's very interesting about communities in crypto is that people want to maintain their privacy. You know, most of the people that you interact with on Telegram, on Twitter, they don't use their faces, their real names, etc. And that's very different from many other communities that we have in life. So everything from, I don't know, if you go to like a local wine meeting or something, you actually do face-to-face with people, or if you're like in the Apple developer community or something like that. It's when it's something like that, those people are like, they have their faces on Twitter, they have their personal blogs that they share. That's very different from crypto, where almost everyone is like, they use some kind of meme for their profile picture. Maybe people have
tacos.
Yeah, like moon tacos, something, and there's nothing wrong with that. It's a completely different model. So we have to think about what community building means. And right now, with the consumer technology that we have, where it's basically centered around an iPhone or a computer, so not really a device that you can use many of your senses with. And I think part of that leads to a sense of detachment, because you're only really talking to people via a text-based linear kind of method, where in Telegram especially, it's very hard to have multiple chats going on at once about different topics, because it's just message, 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 and it's all just one stream of timeline. But if we're thinking about how to build a community now to evolve into something more 5 or 10 years down the road, when things like AR and VR are more normal and accessible, that's when I think things are going to get really cool. Because when you're in an AR or VR world, you can still use another character to represent you. So suddenly we could start having, like, maybe on Sunday mornings, we have like a Tezos meetup where we can actually have people interacting with each other through goggles and microphone or whatever. And they can still maintain, their character. They can customize how they look. It doesn't have to be, their real name. And I think building the community in that direction is super cool. And it's really important for blockchain, I think, because the whole idea of blockchain, like we've spoken in our personal conversations, is the purpose of blockchain is to have a decentralized network. And by definition, decentralization involves many parties. And the only way to reach many parties is to do things like community building, make people feel valued for their engagements and participation, and just general marketing as well. And that's something that's really exciting about Tezos that I see many other projects lacking in. There's so many projects that are kind of stuck in this idea where technology is the most important. And, that's up for debate, I think. I think technology is important, of course, but when you have great technology plus great community building plus great marketing, those things don't have to be exclusive, right? You can have both. You don't have to choose between great technology and great marketing. And I see many projects just saying, let's focus on the tech. Maybe at some point later, since our tech is so great, everyone's just gonna, drop all their stuff and come over here and check it out. And I don't think that's a realistic way of doing things. Certainly not if you want success in the end. So all of these community building incentives and the direction that I see Tezos going with regard to community building is, I think I tweeted this, it's definitely like an inspiration to the industry.
Right. And, for some of those projects, like you mentioned, it's kind of like isolating yourself, in your own vacuum or bubble. And to touch on the great tech and marketing point, I think Vitalik probably put that best in his, now famous tweet. Brian, did you have any other thoughts?
No, I think let's go ahead and move on to the next topic, which is Protocol 007, Delphi. So that was that went live earlier in the month, and it's like a really big upgrade. Just so we're gonna just talk about it because this is the big news. So it's the successor to the Carthage net, which was in place before, and the main improvement for Delphi is lower gas costs. And just on the surface, you see, it's just lower gas costs. Like, what's the big deal with that? And it turns out there's actually, a ton of work went into it. and there are a ton of side effects. So we'll just dig into a few of those. So when the gas costs are lower, it also means that smart contracts are also more efficient with how they use compute. And when people say compute, it just basically means the resources of the nodes that are actually executing these smart contracts around the world. And efficiency just means it can do like more compute operations per unit of gas. And the great thing about Tezos is it's aiming to be a decentralized network where anyone can run a node. So the idea is that the cost of the node should not be a major hindrance. And this is different from many other networks where, you know, you have these recommended specs of, I don't know, $500 a month, $1,000 a month. And that model is not really super scalable in terms of decentralization, just because not everyone can spend an extra $500 or $1,000 a month on the node. So designing a gas model that's flexible enough to account for both, you know, fast compute on high-end equipment and also slower compute on the lower-end equipment is tricky. So what resulted from that was previously the gas costs were overestimated, which provides more safety. And this was according to Nomadic Labs in their blog post, which we'll include in the show notes. And they said that when you underestimate gas costs, that can lead to possible attacks on the network. So with Delphi, they were thinking of ways to decrease the gas costs, and they were able to do this by increasing the performance of block production and also refining the gas model when there is a need for overestimation. And after all of these things that they did in terms of like technical optimizations, which you can read in the blog post, you know, just optimizing the parsing functions. They did some work on how Michelson interprets the smart contract code to make that more efficient. That actually resulted in a 2 to 60x reduction in gas costs, depending on which operation you're doing. So I think from the blog post, I think writing to disk was the operation that saw the biggest decrease in gas usage. So that was 60x, which is a huge decrease. So what's next, right? So soon they'll be doing some benchmarks on real world contracts. So you can prove all of these like 2 to 60x things in a test environment, but we have to think about, you know, how does this translate into how smart contracts are performing in the real world? So I think there's going to be some numbers probably in the next few weeks, or maybe after the new year. And in general, I mean, this just allows for more complex contracts to be deployed in a safe and cheaper manner, which is a win-win. You know, it allows for more complex use cases of the Tezos blockchain, which previously was just not possible. And especially, it's great for use cases like DeFi, where you may have to, you know, make rapid calls to all sorts of contracts. So in that respect, gas costs will no longer be a burden. So just like a very exciting time to be involved in Tezos, I think, with this new Delphi protocol.
Right. And also touching on DeFi, I put out a post maybe about a week or so ago, and Kiefer Taylor of Tessellated Geometry gave like this little graphic, like Arthur was talking about in our previous radio episode. You know, the thing he's most excited for and wants to see are these lending platforms. And after Delphi, I think we're going to start working our way up there pretty closely. You know, right now, you can see on the graphic we're at on-chain price oracles with, after Kiefer and Luke Youngblood's stablecoin gets released, we'll be at stablecoins and synthetic assets.
I think it's important to consider how all of these different technologies relate to each other, and also why things seem to take a long time to manifest in crypto. I think sometimes people forget it's kind of a completely brand new technology and governance system that's never been tried out before. And like you were saying, we'll go ahead and share this graphic, but I think it's like a really, really great graphic where it's just talking about all of the different layers that are needed. And in order to build, and the whole point is kind of in order to build more complex things like lending platforms and decentralized insurance and stuff along those lines, you need all of these underlying technologies, which people are calling primitives. So you've seen that word thrown around, and it's not just in blockchain. Like a primitive is just basically a very low level technology that allows for you to use it to build more complex things. So we're talking about like the base layer. In order for all of these things to be built, we need proof of stake consensus. Like that's the base layer, that's the base chain. And you also need a smart contract language. And from that, you can build more complex things like decentralized exchanges, etc. And at some point, maybe you're looking to build a stable coin now. So you don't just randomly build a stable coin. You need some things to be in place before that stable coin can be used. So in this case, what a stable coin requires is an on-chain price oracle. And Will, did you kind of want to go into a few of the differences maybe between this new stablecoin and how it's different from USDC in terms of algorithmic versus custodial? And then after that, we can kind of expand on why a decentralized price oracle is needed.
Sure. So in regards to that price oracle for Kiefer and Luke Youngblood's stablecoin, I believe they are using Harbinger, which are Tezos native oracle solution. And that currently feeds price data off, I think, 4 exchanges. There may be more now, but in regards to how this certain stablecoin is going to kind of differentiate from some of the existing ones we have out right now, such as USD TZ, Kiefer kind of gave some color on that. Essentially, with the algorithmic stablecoin, which is what Luke and Kiefer stablecoin will be, similar to something like Terra or single collateral DAI, there is a lot of trust if you're using a solution like USDTZ that you're trusting on a few things. The holder of the USDC backing the USDTZ is honest, and they will always retain liquidity. You're trusting that they will do that. You're trusting that they actually have the funds to back everything up. But whereas with Kiefer and Luke's stablecoin, this is going to be completely decentralized and trustless.
So essentially this works by people putting their Tez up as collateral. So it's not like a model like USDC where there's $1 in a bank account somewhere that's backing the stablecoin. And since this new stablecoin is completely like dependent on Tez being the collateral, you always need the current price of XTZ, which is why the price oracle is needed. And that's kind of why they were working on the price oracle first. So a few episodes ago, we were talking about the Harbinger price oracle. So this is kind of what we were getting on. So that had to be in place before work on this could really be done. And like another layer off of that, you have to have a stable base layer, smart contract language in order for the price oracle to be made. So it's all like building things layer by layer And then at some point, we'll have really complicated things like lending platforms and options and insurance stuff. And I think those are the products that can be really be marketed towards the mainstream usage. So each of these layers are building to something better. And yeah, it just takes time, but it's very exciting.
Yeah, basically, for Luke and Kiefer stablecoin, it's going to be very similar to single collateral DAI, which was an earlier version of DAI, which is now multi-collateral. But essentially, users will deposit Tez, and in turn, they get to generate the stablecoin. And when they generate this stablecoin, Calibri is the name I think they're going with. When they generate this, it incurs the debt, one which, over time gets paid, and it allows for their Tez to be released back to them.
Yeah, so this is a very exciting project, and we'll be sure to keep everyone updated about this. So now they've said that they're kind of in an alpha phase. So the next step would be, if they follow the traditional development course, the next step would be beta, and then maybe you have like a release candidate, and then it'll go live. So very excited to see how this develops. It's a much needed primitive in the Tezos ecosystem to build more complex things on top of that. All right, so let's move on to the next topic. Will, did you want to talk about Sword France and what it means to be a corporate baker on Tezos?
We're kind of beginning to see a rising trend in corporate bakers coming to the Tezos ecosystem. Sword Group is the parent entity of Sword France, who is becoming, they've actually became a Tezos corporate baker, and they've also worked on DigiSign. But Sword Group is a fairly large company. It's not really one to sneeze at. I believe they have over 2,300 staff. They operate in 50 or so countries, and their prime focus is, I believe, around international consulting services and software. So I think they're a pretty big deal to be involved in the ecosystem. Apart from Sword France and Sword Group, we've also seen Exion announce that they too want to become a corporate baker. If any of you all are familiar with EDF, their parent company, it's pretty much a French giant electricity company, which has more than, I think it's somewhere in the neighborhood of 60 billion in euros in revenue annually.
Not bad.
So, yeah, that's arguably an even bigger deal. But all that said, these corporate bakers, they'll bake and validate blocks on the Tezos blockchain. I see this as a huge plus, not just from that sense, but more so from the sense that it puts these entities money where their mouth is. Essentially, it provides them with firsthand experience with the chain and get to actually know the technology. Yeah. And these entities can really benefit greatly by taking this approach. In fact, Alon Brucedale, the director of Sword Blockchain, said a few words on that very thing in a recent interview. For the sake of brevity, we may pull that up too on the screen. But essentially, what he said, short version, is we expect more and more corporate organizations, especially but not exclusively from the financial sectors, to get an interest in getting in top of the art consulting and IT services around crypto assets. And he went on to kind of explain that a bit more. But from that perspective, I guess it really excites me to see these corporate bakers come into the ecosystem as they can potentially turn into drivers for large scale applications and targeted use towards, more users and people, and get them exposed to Tezos.
I think it's interesting how all of this is playing out. So this is kind of the path for new technologies to be adopted. So just like when the internet was just founded, who was using the internet first? Well, I guess it was maybe the military. And when it was first released out into the public, it was like nerds and schools. So you had these small communities that were leveraging this new technology, and all of the established and traditional corporate entities, they were like, oh, what the heck is that? Like, looks risky. But over time, as it develops, then they're like, oh, well, maybe we should join too. And that's kind of exactly what we're seeing here, not just in Tezos, other blockchain projects, lots of interest in Bitcoin as well. We've seen a lot more interest in Ethereum, and both from an investment perspective as well as from a technological perspective. So we're kind of moving from the initial nerds who are here for the technology, or maybe the really risky initial investors. Now we're seeing more traditional entities like Sword Group, like Ixion, start to enter. And I think that's a really bullish sign. Not really from an investment perspective. I think it's really bullish sign for the technological perspective. It's kind of a reassurance that maybe all this work is actually for something. Maybe we're not just like doing all of this for nothing. But I think in the initial years of crypto, there was definitely that kind of feeling where like, is this even going to work? So now we're definitely starting to move past that. And the reassurance from all of these, corporate entities, I think it can actually have a real effect on things like how crypto is regulated, because maybe you have all of these companies that are lobbying for blockchain and crypto to be regulated in a certain way that benefits them. They have a lot of money to back that up. So yeah, I think it's starting to become really interesting from that aspect.
Right. And, like I was saying, it actually gives them this firsthand experience and essentially puts their money where their mouth is, not just saying that they're going to do X, Y, Z. They're actually coming to the chain, baking and validating blocks. But I think the more interesting part is what they can do with the firsthand experience. All right, so moving on to our final topic. Recently, there was a new release of TzStats following the Delphi activation. Brian, would you like to discuss some of those changes?
Just recently, there was the release of TzStats version 2.1. And the big focus with version 2.1 was to make data of the Tezos blockchain as accessible as possible. Just a big focus on user experience and how people look at the screen, parse the data, understand it, etc. And doing that for both beginners and professionals alike. And the idea behind this is that especially they wanted to make smart contract data more accessible and viewable. So now you can dive into things like the contract code, storage, and all of these other things that have to do with smart contracts. And the timing really coincides with the recent Delphi protocol upgrade, because the whole point of that upgrade was to reduce gas costs to make it easier, more efficient, cheaper for people to deploy smart contracts. So the idea is that now that's in place, we kind of see an environment where people are more motivated to do smart contract deployment on Tezos. And because we see that potential trend in the future. We want a way to display the smart contract data in a good way in case people want to look into it. Maybe they want to do like an audit of the code. They don't have to like jump to GitHub somewhere, find the specific repo and look there. And they can just go to a centralized place, go to TzStats.com. They just click on the contract code and they can read it right there. It's also a great place for people to learn, I think. Learn about maybe best practices when it comes to how to deploy a contract and stuff along those lines. So we'll be sure to include this announcement post in the show notes. But overall, I think it's a really great upgrade, and it's very timely with the recent Delphi upgrade.
Right. And I think Blockwatch did a really good job on this release. We actually had Oliver and Alexander Eichhorn, I believe, on earlier in the year discussing what was then a new release of TzStats, but we'll be sure to link that talk as well. It seems like we're going to be linking a lot of things this episode because there's been so much news. But other than that, Brian, did you have any final thoughts you'd like to say before we wrap up?
Yeah, hope everyone had a great Thanksgiving. Hope everyone's safe. And thank you for listening to this episode of TezTalks Radio. And we'll be back soon with another episode.